I find it pretty ironic that nowadays, the idea of war and warfare is something that gets trotted out in video games in a far more light-hearted context. I'm referring more to the realities of warfare, and the genuine consequences that present themselves when two nations go at each other. The innocent bystanders who lose their homes, their families. Being in the midst of any kind of conflict will uproot your very way of life. That idea in itself is terrifying, and that's not even taking into account those who are engaging in the conflicts. Men on both sides sending out bullets, grenades, artillery, all as a way to further their country's ultimate objective, whatever that may be. These scenes are ones that have remained some of the most disturbing in our history, of course with key examples spawning from conflicts in the 20th century, like the First and Second World Wars. But we also can't forget, before the invention of automatic rifles or armoured vehicles, you had men charging at each other on horseback, swiping with sharp swords and stabbing with spikes, creating even more grisly scenes, with people constantly getting their arms, legs and heads sliced off. The point is, none of this stuff is very pleasant, yet somehow, video games have worked off these ideas going back several decades. And as the war and shooter genres evolved, I feel like they've jettisoned off into an increasingly safe, tame, and inoffensive position. Now it's important to understand, this isn't particularly unusual when looking at examples of this outside gaming. Tons of kids play with their toy guns and toy soldiers every single day. People go into fields firing at each other with paintball and airsoft guns. And while I don't have a problem with any of these, I can at least understand those who claim these are somewhat inappropriate and almost trivialize conflicts that are taking place in real life. And of course, there's many parents who'd find it inappropriate for their kids to play with toy guns, especially ones that are emulating real life weaponry. There's been a definite switch in the video game scene, however, where almost all games that revolve around warfare now tend to focus on conflicts that are entirely fictional and feature characters that just don't seem all that bothered about what it is they're actually doing. The prime series to look at in this case is obviously the Call of Duty games. Starting off, the series was solely based on World War II, putting us in the shoes of Americans, Brits, Russians, while always pushing back against the Germans. World at War does the best job by far at showing the horrors of war, upping the violence and gore, and having a cast of characters that are as memorable as they are grounded. Fast forward to the later games, and you've still got real-world elements being introduced, but on the whole, we're dealing with entirely fictional antagonists, fighting in battles that have never taken place, with characters that now throw out one-liners every 5 seconds. And that's perfectly fine, but if you're looking for anything similar to what you found when playing World at War, none of the later games even come close. That game can be outright disturbing at points. The only disturbing thing about some of the future campaigns is how bad some of them are. And this takes us to the game we're going to be discussing today, one that despite setting itself up as entirely fictional, focuses not only on the horrors of war yet again, but also the shooter format itself, and the actions players feel comfortable doing because of the virtual nature of the experience. And that's the game Spec Ops: The Line, a game developed by the studio Yager and being released in 2012. Now looking at this game on the surface, I think you'd have a hard time trying to pick out quite literally anything about this game that even looks remotely unique. The game cover looks like the most run-of-the-mill military artwork you could imagine. The name of the game sounds equally generic, and observing any footage of the game, it'll look no different to the countless other cover-based shooters that came about after Gears of War popularised the genre. It's the main reason why I, and I assume plenty others, had never touched the game up until the last few years or so. I had heard there was something deeper to the game that lied beyond its rather bland surface, but it was that surface that always seemed to push me away. However, after experiencing the game for myself a fair few times at this point, I'd now be inclined to say that everything I just mentioned is intentional, or at least I think so. After several playthroughs, I perceive Spec Ops as an incredibly well-crafted and thoughtful game in terms of its narrative, while still leaving a bit to be desired when it comes to how the game actually plays. However, it's that narrative which we're mainly going to be focusing on today, and it's one that presents us with a level of intrigue directly from the main menu. So long as you're starting the game fresh, the initial title screen presents us with an American flag hanging upside down, with the city of Dubai laying in almost complete ruin beyond it. This is where all of the events in Spec Ops take place. There's been some kind of catastrophe that's taken place in Dubai. Enormous amounts of sand have taken over the city, and while there's still some survivors holding out, their food and water supplies are seemingly running thin. The upside down flag is something we see several times throughout the game. In fact, there's not many instances I can remember where the American flag is shown upright. This is done to show a sign of distress or extreme emergency. Essentially the same idea as sending out an SOS message. In the back, we're also able to hear a heavily distorted version of the American national anthem being played. This appears to either be emulating or is actually actually the version Jimi Hendrix played at Woodstock in 1969, a performance that used the Star-Spangled Banner to make a comment on the wars that were being fought at the time. Jimi ingeniously uses his guitar to create the distinct sounds of bombs being dropped, and people screaming out in pain. Much like the entirety of Woodstock 69, messages of anti-war, unity and peace were key. So to see that introduced during the opening moments of Spec Ops, as well as everything else that's on show, it's telling us straight away that there's more to this game than meets the eye. This isn't a game about mindless shooting. In fact, it could be the exact opposite. The game then begins in just about the most over-the-top fashion you could possibly imagine. A man firing out of a helicopter with a minigun as several other helicopters follow you while firing back. While creating some really great visuals, this may seem like it discredits the point I was literally just making when claiming that Spec Ops isn't like many of the other high-octane, unserious shooters that I was just mentioning. This is where I have to state, however, that this game, in many parts of its design, is taking on a clear satirical nature to it. That won't be immediately apparent, of course, but as you make your way further into the game and get a deeper understanding of what it is this game's actually focusing on, moments like the opening become pure satire. It doesn't make them any less impressive, I should add, but I find it very hard to say these are being taken 100% seriously, as the game itself actively starts commenting on the ridiculousness of these over-the-top set pieces. The intro caps off with us crashing into another helicopter, an important detail we should note being the sounds of the helicopter blades in the back. The plot that gets set up after this is one that's following the route of Joseph Conrad's famous Heart of Darkness story, and if you're unfamiliar with that, it's the same story that Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now was also based off. And in the case of Spec Ops, our version of Colonel Kurtz is a guy called John Conrad, obviously being a bit of a reference to the writer in question.
Rumor is Conrad was ordered to abandon the city. He defied that order, and the 33rd stood with him. Now the official story's still hazy about what happened next. All we know for sure is that the storms got worse. Much worse.
Once an esteemed war hero, Conrad's now found himself holed up in Dubai after failing to evacuate civilians, with his combat unit, the 33rd, standing by him. So if you've read Heart of Darkness or watched Apocalypse Now, it's a setup that you could entirely expect, but we'll see as we continue on how using this story in the context of a video game actually results in some even more unique and interesting story beats. We're not taking on the role of Conrad, instead we take control of Captain Walker, the leader of a small group featuring two other soldiers, Adams and Lugo. Appearing to go back in time before the helicopter crash, we see our team arrive in Dubai, and it's just about exactly the same as what we've seen up to this point. The area is completely swamped in sand. All roads are packed with broken down, abandoned cars, and to begin with, any sign of life seems to be entirely absent, even having the team question why they're even there because of that fact.
Hey! Anyone out there? Stalker says what?
Leave it alone. No one's out there.
Then what the fuck are we doing here?
Lugo's got a point.
As you make your way forward, you eventually discover a small hideout that appears to hold American equipment and vehicles. And not only that, but upon further investigation, it appears the American soldiers who would have once used these things have been killed, assumedly by the people who ambush us shortly after.
My name is Captain Martin Walker. We're looking for survivors.
This is where things start getting really interesting, however, as it's in this moment where the mind games really start getting thrown at the player. What makes the psychological elements of Spec Ops so fantastic is that aside from a few instances that are thrown directly in the player's face, a lot of these things are wholly dependent on having the player themselves discover and realise they're being played about with. This first one is a brilliant example of that, being all revolved around the discussion Lugo starts having with one of the men behind us.
You speak Farsi? Maybe we can understand each other better.
The important detail to pick out is Lugo's acknowledgement of how these men speak Farsi. Farsi is not a common language to find in Dubai. Arabic is the country's official language, and even if we try take the view that these men just speak Farsi instead, there's a detail at the start of the game as to why these people are speaking that language.
There was this one time in Kabul when he dragged my bleeding carcass half a mile to an evac chopper. So maybe I'm biased.
On a first playthrough, this will likely not be apparent whatsoever, but in the first 10 minutes, we're getting hints immediately that not everything is what it seems. You've got some local insurgents who are speaking a different language, and it just so happens to be one that directly correlates to where Conrad saved Walker. We won't find out till later why this happens, but as I said, you should already be seeing how we might be witnessing more of this story from how Walker himself is perceiving it, as opposed to how the events are actually going down in reality. From there, we fight through a number of these local insurgents. However, However, along the way, there's even more details we can find when paying attention to our surroundings. These are ones that are easily missable due to the threats that are now firing back at us. However, taking a closer look in certain areas, you'll be able to see things like the face of Conrad on nearby trucks. Not only does his presence here not even make any sense to begin with, but we can also see from the name on the poster that Walker appears to be hallucinating Conrad's face onto this billboard. And that's not the only thing he ends up hallucinating in this section, as upon heading even further forward, we end up discovering some more dead American soldiers. The difference here, however, is that their appearance shows a striking resemblance to Walker himself. Same hair, same facial features, same earpiece in their right ear. Walker envisioning himself dead on the ground actually has some pretty serious connotations with it that we'll be seeing even more of later on. As Walker and his team make their way even deeper into the city, they get hounded by even more of these insurgents. However, through sheer luck, they end up making the discovery that these guys are actually taking orders from the CIA.
Where's the soldier? The one we took from the plane?
Downstairs, sir.
Is he being guarded?
At all times.
Good. Think I'll go say hi.
Agent Custody. Wait.
What?
He won't talk, sir.
He'll talk to me.
Walker, that guy was American.
Yeah, I noticed.
They purposely stirred up the locals, and as a result, the American soldiers who were part of Conrad's 33rd Battalion fought back. This is where things start getting a whole lot more twisted, however, as when we track down this CIA guy and promptly watch him get eliminated by the 33rd soldier he was interrogating, the soldier doesn't appear to be all that friendly either.
Walker, Captain, we found your friend at the plane. He told us where to find you.
Really? Where's he at?
He didn't make it.
Why am I not surprised?
So what? You think we killed him?
I didn't say that.
You're not saying much of anything, Lieutenant.
Article 4, Captain. You gotta speak to my commander.
Well, where's he at?
By now, I'd imagine he's just downstairs.
Yeah, I'll bet.
We've heard several times from Walker so far that these guys, these American soldiers, are supposed to be on our side, but it really doesn't seem like that from how we interact with this one. What's worse is that when we pursue this guy into a nearby safe house, him and his teammates presume that we're the CIA and begin opening fire. This starts us on a dark path throughout the game, one that we didn't start, but still one that we thoroughly engage in. We murder American soldiers, we kill the guys who are supposed to be on our side, and as the game continues, we seem to only find ourselves killing more and more as we journey forward. In these moments, we have to understand that I think there's more to this than purely showing the morally questionable actions that people have to take on the battlefield. That's a part of it, of course, but I feel it's commenting an equal amount on war video games once again. So many shooters have us going up against threats coming from Russia, Afghanistan, Japan, etc. But this game puts us in a position where we're constantly blowing the heads off our own countrymen. Spec Ops is a game that can make the player reflect on their actions, and the morality of their actions. And I feel this situation summed up well after our first encounter with these guys.
Those were soldiers. Our own guys.
It was self-defense.
Doesn't make me feel any better.
It's not supposed to.
In life, people too often try to search for the right in what they're doing, that they set up a mental block to shut out how wrong the other side of their actions might actually be. Walker isn't wrong when he says they had no choice, but that doesn't mean killing your fellow soldiers should feel justified to the point where you feel no emotion whatsoever. These American soldiers serve as the primary threat for the rest of the game, and I've heard some show a dislike towards this and say it would have been better if there was more of a choice, maybe a non-lethal option or something, but that would obviously destroy the whole point. By forcing the player to kill these soldiers, and even having them question why they have to do this and if there was some other way, you're making them feel the impact of their actions far more than most other shooter games out there. The lack of choice is what makes the game. There's several key points outside of our battles with American soldiers where you could see the potential for a choice to be presented, and as we'll be seeing later on, you give the player a way to reroute or change the outcome of those, and the weight and meaning of those moments would drop off significantly. This is a game where you oftentimes feel backed up into a corner with no other option than the one laid out in front of you. And while in the game design sense that is true, that doesn't change the impact it has on the narrative whatsoever. Making our way deeper into the city, we get some more hallucinations of Conrad on advertisements. The one we see in this moment being even more blatant, because outside of this first sighting, every other time we see this ad throughout the level, it's reverted back to how it actually appears. Walker and his men eventually discover areas where massive amounts of bodies have been piled up underground, once again, presumably by the 33rd.
Oh my fucking god. Jesus. So many bodies.
Throughout the game, you'll find many murals and lots of graffiti on the walls, most of which merely feel like they give the environment a bit more style. However, when it comes to particularly horrific scenes like this, it's always worth looking around to see if there's any standout murals, because as you'll see, whenever there's images with a face, their eyes will appear blacked out. Eyes are oftentimes described as the window to the soul, so in showing them blacked out nearby these disturbing scenes, it's almost telling us that they're stripping away any kind of humanity that may be left within these soldiers. From here, it's just more fighting with the 33rd until we reach the infamous White Phosphorus mission. I've heard people describe this as one of the most harrowing missions in video game history, and I'd say that's quite apt to be honest. The mission starts with an interesting detail right off the bat that most players will more than likely miss. For most of the game, we've purely been dealing with cold, concrete interiors, or barren, sandy exteriors, so it's rather unusual for us to be greeted with some greenery at the start of this one, with a large tree that appears to be quite healthy, as well as several plants that lie beneath it. However, making our way past this tree and looking back, it loses all of its leaves and now looks entirely dead. Walker's mind is messing with him again, but this visual detail is a stark foreshadowing as to what's about to go down. When being greeted with a full-on army in front of them, Walker makes the call to use the White Phosphorus nearby. What Lugo mentions about choice fitting perfectly with what we discussed earlier.
You're fucking kidding, right? That's white phosphorus.
Yeah, I know what it is.
You've seen what this shit does. You know we
Might
can't
not have
use
a
it.
choice, Lugo.
There's always a choice.
No, there's really not.
We have no choice. Just like Walker's ordering his men to proceed with using the White Phosphorus, the game is ordering us to launch it as well. While the final result is still a shock, it's all the elements which lead up to it that pack just as much of a punch. If you notice that tree to begin with, that already sets the tone. But when actually being told that we're going to be using White Phosphorus, we can't help but cast our minds back to when we last saw this getting used. Not only were we almost caught directly in the crossfire, but we were also able to see the effects of it right up close. Men screaming out in pain, rolling around the floor while burning alive. We're starting to reach a point where Walker's going way too far in how he's carrying out his objectives. Lugo doesn't seem too thrilled about what they're doing, but he goes along with it because he's been ordered to. Walker's now appearing to look at his fights on the battlefield with an anything goes kind of mentality. It doesn't matter how bloody, how visceral, or how wrong the manner of approach may be. The more of these American soldiers he's killed, he's appeared to have been desensitized to what it is they're actually doing. As Adam said during their first encounter, just because it's self-defense, it doesn't make him feel any better. And just because this may be the only way in which they can carry on with their mission, it doesn't make it any less wrong. So we've seen the effects already with our own eyes. However, there's also other things we experience, like the reflection of Walker's face on the monitor, creating a striking image, with the screen almost working as a mirror, making Walker look at himself as he carries out one of the most brutal attacks in the game so far.
Hover disabled!
And then, of course, we've got the aftermath, stepping through an area that's been absolutely obliterated by us, with men burnt to a crisp, and essentially all surrounding tents and vehicles lighting up and exploding in a blaze. The big reveal comes at the end of the area though, discovering that in our reckless attempt to wipe out the 33rd in the area, we'd accidentally killed a large number of civilians that were also here.
You brought this on yourself.
We were helping.
What? Oh no.
Most players will likely be unaware of this possibility when playing for the first time, leading to a fantastically shocking moment. However, on repeat playthroughs, while you still have no choice in the matter, you're able to see on the camera that these guys do actually act like civilians too, backing up into the furthest corner possible before inevitably suffering the onslaught of what we shoot onto them. This is the point where you have to really start questioning what Walker's actually doing now. His actions have only become increasingly more violent, and while being a mistake, he and his men have unknowingly committed an absolute atrocity. At least with the 33rd, they could have lived with the knowledge that they would have been killed in return. But these are the people they were supposed to be helping. All of the imagery during this sequence is excellent, but there's one detail that's shown off here a lot more clearly than other parts of the game, and that's Walker's eyes. If you look closely, you'll see his eyes are almost shattered, like they're made out of glass. And if you look to the eyes of any other character in the game, you'll see this isn't merely a visual glitch, it's intentional. Much like I talked about when mentioning how the eyes are seen as the window to the soul, Walker's are smashed for the entire game. Although we don't initially know it, he's a twisted figure from start to finish. You could even claim these cracked eyes represent how he sees the world, constantly hallucinating, getting information wrong. We're starting to realise how he's in no fit position to continue this mission. After committing this heinous act, he turns around and tries to act like this was anyone else's fault but his own.
Reinforcements will be here any second. We need to keep moving.
But Walker, you're not even...
I'm gonna make these bastards pay for what they've done. Now, are you with me or not?
Walker's now gone through a good deal of mental torment, and this starts reflecting itself quite a bit more in some of the hallucinations we're able to witness. As we fight our way into one of the nearby buildings, there's a collection of monitors that we're able to inspect. As we're fighting quite a few enemies in this place, it's another situation where I'd have to imagine most players will be moving past this area none the wiser. However, taking a closer look, you can see the images of the burned civilians, as well as the totally wrecked area that came before them. The way in which they're presented, that being in crystal clear clarity compared to the other screens that feature heavy distortion, making us aware this is more than likely just Walker's mind once again. Not long after this, we find a room with some more dead bodies tied up to chairs, while getting our first proper interaction with John Conrad.
Colonel, I'm Captain Walker.
Captain Walker. Yes, I remember you. Kabul, I think it was.
This is yet another trick in reality. However, the way in which the scene is initially conveyed won't make the player aware of that fact. A couple things we can spot come from the room itself, and the windows on the outside as we rappel down. First, if we take a look around the room, we'll find the walls are covered with hundreds of names of dead soldiers. But if we make our way towards the end of the list, you'll be able to see the names Lugo and Adams have also been put up on the wall. Another piece of dark foreshadowing occurs directly after this. As we rappel down the side of the building, we can see a reflection of a hanging body. This is obviously impossible in a real world sense. There's nowhere from the position we're in that could have a hanging body, and it's not a reflection of Lugo or Adams because they don't rappel alongside you. What occurs after this is a sort of trial from Conrad, putting us face to face with two men strung up to a bridge. One of these is said to have stolen some water, which is a valuable commodity at this point, especially with the severe sandstorm that's basically destroyed Dubai, and the other guy is someone who arrested him, but murdered his family in the process. Here is a situation where we do actually have a choice, although it's one where it only appears like that in the moment. Killing either of the two guys will give you a slightly different response from Conrad, and will result in the nearby snipers backing off. Shooting the snipers, however, will bring you directly into combat, which isn't that big of a deal, considering we get into a fight shortly after this anyways. We go through the motions for a bit longer, before eventually coming across a friendly soldier called Riggs, who plans to steal the city's water supply as a way to cripple the 33rd. And that's exactly what we help him do, travelling to the Aquatic Coliseum and stealing the trucks inside containing the water. One thing you might notice during our escape with the water, as well as several other moments in this game, is how unserious the gameplay actually is. It might sound like a bit of a contradiction from my end, as I've previously discussed how Spec Ops oftentimes looks at our actions in a darker, grittier, and more realistic view. And that is the case. However, we can't forget the commentary that I feel is still being made about video game shooters at large. Now, this is something I think can be disagreed with, depending on how you personally perceive these decisions. However, in my opinion, moments like this, and the several points in which loud rock music is thrown over certain fights, it feels like an outright satire to me. It feels like a self-aware imitation of the hundreds of explosive set pieces we see in several massive shooter franchises. And I'd argue the way in which Spec Ops integrates them only ends up enhancing the more brutal moments that oftentimes come after them even more. It's like we briefly get to indulge in the power trip side of things that many shooter games rely on for the endurance of their runtime, before quickly getting shot back down to earth when looking at the reality of what it is we've actually done. And the truck escape sequence is yet another one of these occasions. Blaring rock music in the back, shooting out grenades while hanging on the side of a truck, buildings exploding in flames. It's all rather insane. For the briefest of moments, we feel damn near unstoppable. That feeling comes screeching to a halt, however, when Riggs purposely causes both trucks to crash, refusing to let the 33rd have any chance of getting them back.
In 4 days, this city will begin dying of thirst. Just like Riggs wanted. This is your fault, Walker. You did this. not me.
As a hallucination of Comrade tells us, we've screwed up again, this time by trusting the wrong people and going through with their plans. We came into this mission hoping to save people, when have only come out of it looking like villains.
The water's gone. That's all that matters. Fuck. This ain't how it's supposed to end.
He was right about you.
Look, if people find out what he did, the whole region will declare war on us. And we'll lose. Now the world will never know.
Riggs' whole mission from the start was to get rid of the water. He wanted to wipe out Dubai, so no war is started between the Middle East and the US, which as he says, might have not been the nicest thing for him to do, but it is one that has the best chance of avoiding a greater conflict. No action is truly right when in this position. You're always going to end up hurting somebody in the process. At this point, we're given the choice of either letting Riggs burn or shooting him in the head. Where you'll find some paintings and statues up ahead will change depending on how you deal with him.
Walker, come in.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank God. The 33rd showed up before we found you. We had to run. Started to think you didn't make it.
I got lucky.
And Riggs?
Dead.
Good.
No, not good. He fucked us. Fucked everybody. Thanks to him, everyone in Dubai will be dead in a few days. The city needs to be evacuated ASAP.
We eventually meet back up with Adams and Lugo, and after dealing with more of the 33rd, we set about finding the guy who's been talking to us over the radio throughout the game. At one point, when ziplining into a building, one of the enemies we bash into turns into Adams for a second.
What are you doing? Adams, you can't do this, man!
Another hallucination wouldn't be much to talk about, but it's more the manner in which Walker deals with this guy which is even more shocking. The brutality of these executions is something that gradually increases as the game goes on, and the dialogue that accompanies them also changes. So whereas Walker starts the game off taking these guys out in a more clean-cut manner, the mental torment he endures eventually leads him to the point where he's bashing their brains in, or prolonging the pain they're in. When eventually meeting the radio guy, we have a brief discussion with him before Lugo blows his brains out. And I think the most important thing to pay attention to here is the manner in which Walker conveys himself when putting out his message.
To anyone who can hear me, I'm the commander of an American evacuation force. We're here to rescue you. But first, the 33rd will pay for what they've done.
This is another pattern that we've seen from Walker. He's so desperately trying to be a hero in this situation, while having essentially none of his actions paint him out as such. Whether it be through his own mistakes, or his continued descent into Dubai, when him and his team should have ultimately backed off already. Can we actually think about one good thing Walker's actually done throughout the game? He's gone about killing insurgents, Americans, civilians, he's helped in destroying the city's water supply. There's not one good thing that he's actually done, yet he continues forward. He puts out this message like they're the good guys and that they're here to help out. Even if civilians do come into contact with them at this point, they probably don't want anything to do with them. They've come in and only made everything even worse than it already was. From here until the end of the game is really where the bizarre qualities go into overdrive. And that starts with us getting back onto a helicopter when getting ambushed by comrades. Not only does Walker lose his head entirely when getting his hands on the minigun, telling Adams to stay in the area longer so that he can test out the weapon.
Circle around by the pool, Adams! I want to see what this gun can do!
But upon flying out of there, we end up coming full circle. We're brought right back to the opening set piece at the start of the game, in which Walker is strangely aware of the moment, claiming it's not right and that they've done this already.
Wait, this isn't right!
Well, it's too late now!
No, I mean we did this already!
What do you mean?
Fuck it! It's nothing, just shake these fucking guys!
You got it!
A really weird choice with only a few real outcomes. Either Walker's gone through the entirety of the game from the same perspective as we have, quite literally experiencing the helicopter crash and remembering it at this point, or it could very well be a fourth wall breaking joke, a nod to the player that they have literally done this already. There are some important details to note about this, however, which could change how you perceive the helicopter crash, and could ultimately change how you see the entirety of the game as well. The writer of the game, Walt Williams, has made some clarifications about certain visual elements in Spec Ops, as well as clarification on this whole fourth wall breaking helicopter sequence too. He noted that when a normal transition is performed in Spec Ops, it's either a fade or cut to black, as you could naturally assume. However, when Walker's either hallucinating or deluding himself in some fashion, the transition is changed to a fade to white. One very blatant example of this comes before we're made to choose which person to kill by Comrade. While the cutscenes in this game usually occur either straight away or from a fade up from a black screen, this one has us looking into the air as the screen turns completely white. We of course don't know right now what it is Walker was actually hallucinating at that point, but with that knowledge, we at least know he was hallucinating something. As for the helicopter crash, Williams also mentioned how the way in which he personally perceives the plot, Walker dies in the crash. This would make all the strange sightings of Comrade on posters, trees losing their leaves in the blink of an eye, and essentially all the strange oddities we've come across make a bit more sense. The world isn't making absolute sense, because we're viewing it through Walker's dying memory. The man at the beginning could be seen to be speaking Farsi instead of Arabic, because Walker's memories of Comrade in Afghanistan are bleeding into another. Now bear in mind, while this is how the lead writer of the game perceives the events, which should ultimately be the be and end all, I don't imagine he would be pleased if you take his word as gospel. This game's written in a way where there's many other outcomes you could personally come up with that still work in spite of what Williams suggests. But keeping this interpretation in mind, it does make a lot of the stuff we've seen earlier in the game make a bit more sense. And in terms of what we see after the helicopter crash, I don't think it's surprising at all to see these hallucinatory aspects get ramped up even more. We can see this directly after the crash itself, waking up in a hellish version of Dubai, surrounded by countless bodies with glowing red eyes, and being told by several characters essentially how much of a failure we've been, and how many people we've gotten killed along the way. With Williams seeing Walker as dead during the last part of the game, he describes it as Walker's own purgatory, and we already somewhat feel the unreality of everything immediately. We've just been in a helicopter crash in a pretty dense part of the city, and now, where are we? We're back in a more barren desert environment, and can't see any helicopter in sight. You'll notice how the helicopter crash quite literally never gets brought up again. Getting into contact with Adams, you merely discuss where you guys have found yourselves. Not a single mention about almost dying during the sandstorm. Something else that many players will miss as well are the couple new death screens that present themselves at different points in these final levels. You'll find the first one here if you end up dying during this initial encounter when going to rescue Adams. The screen will fade to white once again, and show a brief image of Comrade looking down at you while we can hear Adams shouting in the back. These screens can only be seen one time. However, the loading screens that are shown upon us dying subsequent times are now equally strange. Whereas before there were messages shown at the bottom of the screen giving us tips in relation to the gameplay, now we start getting shown ones like this. To kill for yourself is murder, to kill for your government is heroic, to kill for entertainment is harmless. Seemingly being a reference to the video game format once again. Others include, can you even remember why you came here? A genuinely good point to bring up, as Walker's initial mission to merely see if there were people alive in Dubai has ended up spiraling so far out of control. And we even get references to our role in all this. The US military does not condone the killing of unarmed combatants, but this isn't real, so why should you care? All really interesting to think about. These messages alone will have you questioning Walker, as well as yourself, perhaps even more than some of the other things we've already witnessed. That second unique death screen lies further ahead, and ties into another bizarre oddity that revolves around Lugo. Walker and Adams eventually get back in contact with Lugo. However, as you plan to meet up with him, we hear over the radio that he's run into some locals, who don't sound too pleased about what him and his men have been doing.
Fuck! I need help! They're closing in! Oh shit!
Talk to us, Lugo.
What the fuck? Just stay the fuck away from me!
This leads to another pretty shocking moment where we discover Lugo getting lynched as the locals cheer round him.
Get ready. The rope! Fuck! Shoot the rope! Everyone back now!
And despite our efforts to save him, Lugo dies, and we're given the option of either shooting and killing the locals, or shooting up in the air to scare them off.
Go! While you still can. Fucking animals! Get the fuck out of here! Run! Faster!
It's only Walker and Adams left, although ultimately it doesn't seem like Adams is that big a fan of Walker now anyways. He pulls no punches in reminding Walker how all of this is his fault, and that Lugo's dead solely because of him.
Don't tell me what I already know. Lugo's blood is on your hands, not mine. Bang.
Once again, thinking of this in the context of a purgatory makes even more sense. Adams may very well have acted like this in a real-world scenario, but up till now, he's questioned us, but hasn't dug the knife in towards our failures in quite the same way as we see here. Plenty more fighting ensues after this, but the main encounter that's worth knowing, which also hides that second unique death screen I talked about, is when we run into a heavy that appears like Lugo. It's once again not a surprise to hear that only things come out of his mouth relate to Walker's failures, even having Walker himself snap at the end, and wish death on this imaginary version of Lugo.
This is all your fault! Yours! Just fucking die!
If you end up dying in this fight, we get another fade to white before getting an even more eerie death screen. Whereupon listening and looking closely once again, we can not only hear a woman humming Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but the image itself is another callback to the white phosphorus incident earlier in the game. Just to screw with our heads even more, when getting back into the game after seeing this, the Lugo Heavy will now be replaced with a normal one. By the end of all this, Walker and Adams end up surrounded, in which Adams accepts defeat while going out in a blaze of glory, while Walker still tries to play the hero, first surrendering and then making a final dash for the tower comrades hold up in while Adams gets shot down.
The mission's over! We failed!
Not while I'm still breathing!
Fine! Then keep breathing! Run, motherfucker!
Walker's finally done it though. He reached his final destination, and going by his logic, it appears all that's left to do is make our way inside and put a bullet in Conrad's head. Not like that will change anything, everything bad we've already done can't be changed, and there's a very high possibility that all this stuff is taking place in Walker's head anyways. So this is no longer about achieving a certain goal. I perceive this more as Walker's dying mind trying to provide any form of justice or resolution towards his mission. The men that greet us at the entrance don't try and fight. Instead, they immediately surrender and inform us that Conrad's waiting for us upstairs.
Captain Walker, we're all that's left at the damn 33rd. We surrender, sir. Dubai is yours.
Where is Conrad?
Where he's always been. Upstairs, waiting for you.
And when finally coming face to face with the man, we first discover him painting the white phosphorus scene, pushing Walker to understand the gravity of his actions, and making him realise he can't simply blame him for the mistakes that Walker himself has made.
You did this.
No, you did. Your orders killed 47 innocent people. Someone has to pay for your crimes, Walker. Who's it gonna be?
And what's even worse for him in this case is that Conrad leaves Walker without the option to blame him anymore, revealing that he's in fact been dead all this time. The voices he's been hearing throughout the game, the choices that were supposedly set up for us, all of it was in Walker's head. Even in the moments where Conrad explains this to us, we get brief points where we can see Walker mouthing Conrad's dialogue to himself.
This isn't my fault. Takes a strong man to deny what's right in front of him.
Now, I personally take all this stuff with a pinch of salt once again because of the whole purgatory idea. We can't forget that taking that into account, all these revelations are coming from within Walker's mind. We can't say this is actual confirmation that Conrad was dead all this time, or that Walker was shooting two dead hanging bodies, because Walker died before he could discover this stuff himself. But outside of that, on a mental level, it's once again Walker's mind waking him up to the reality of the situation. He too often blamed this figure of Conrad for the mistakes he was making, and as he tells us, all these mistakes were mainly spawned out of Walker's want to be a hero.
The truth, Walker, is that you're here because you wanted to feel like something you're not. A hero.
The more he screwed up, the more he pushed to be someone that he simply wasn't capable of being. He wanted to save the day, save the civilians, and reap vengeance on those that deserved it. But when being unable to, instead of accepting it and perhaps changing his course of action, he either blamed someone or something else and pushed his own issues to the back of his mind, continuing his pursuit of being the saviour. There's two final choices we're given in this game after this revelation. The first relates to either shooting Conrad or shooting yourself. You kill yourself and the game ends immediately. However, you shoot Conrad, and we get a final small cutscene showing Walker finding himself in the exact same position as Conrad at the start, before then getting one final epilogue sequence, allowing us to either drop our weapons and go back home with the army men, or on the other hand, open fire on them.
Captain Walker, we are here to help, but first, I need you to lay down your weapon.
He's not complying.
He's shell-shocked. Give him a second.
The most important thing to note about this entire ending being how Walker envisions himself as Comrade. In shooting him, he then essentially became him, even putting on his jacket during the epilogue, in which we can clearly see Comrade's name labelled on it. The option of killing the men is just pure evil. However, by dropping our weapon, we get a small closing cutscene where Walker alludes to the fact he never made out of Dubai alive.
What was it like? How'd you survive all this?
Who said I did?
This obviously being able to be read in two ways, either from the point of view that he's so mentally broken that he's nowhere near the man he was when going in, or there's also the fact that he more than likely died in the helicopter crash, meaning he literally didn't make it out of the place alive. Either way, this ending is one that at least gives some sense of closure to Walker's story. He puts down his gun and stops fighting once and for all. But everything from the crash to the end has been so surreal that it's pointless trying to look at it on any literal basis. I don't really perceive there to be any real optimistic ending to the game. I am someone with the view that Walker died in the crash, so while his dying mind may have given him some reprieve on the way out, nothing he and his men did was resolved. Dubai's people were likely still wiped out from the destruction of their water, and the atrocities we created along the way can never be atoned for. Making our way back to the main menu, we're not only presented with the final menu screen, seeing the American flag as well as Dubai itself utterly destroyed, but much like all of the menus so far, there's a key sound that plays at some point throughout every single one of them. The sound of helicopter blades, the exact same one we heard at the beginning of the game when crashing. That moment is pivotal towards the story, and the amount its importance gets reinforced when it comes to several elements, only makes it seem even more obvious that Walker's very much dead upon that event occurring. But in the end, where does all this leave us? I could imagine some people reaching the end of Spec Ops and perhaps even being somewhat underwhelmed. There's no real resolution, Comrade was apparently dead all this time, and the true ending of the game that plays out in reality is one where Walker and his men all sporadically die in a crash. Spec Ops is a game all about looking at the deeper meaning of these things, however, and it's the main reason why I've returned to this game several times over the years to experience the narrative once more. While I think the criticisms over the gameplay are entirely valid, it does feel like one of the blandest shooters I've ever played. The focus on the horrors of war, the idea of being a hero on a battlefield where there isn't any, and the constant psychological torment we're put under, it still makes it one of the most intriguing shooter games I've ever played. The rather generic exterior of the game almost disarms us, before presenting some of the most shocking and disturbing sequences I've seen from a shooter, namely ones like the white phosphorus moment or lynching of Lugo. For those who perceive it as a satire of shooter video games, I can very much see that. The game's satirical nature is shown off multiple times throughout, but especially in the closing stages, it starts getting thrown directly in our face with some of the loading screens. Many people are left questioning what the point of all this was, what they were supposed to actually take away from it, and while some almost feel anger at this possibility, then feel like their time's been wasted, I am a huge fan of what's done here. This is a game that leaves everything so ambiguous and open that it's pretty much on you what you're perceiving the story of Spec Ops was ultimately trying to convey. The literal events in my view are almost irrelevant by the time we reach the end. Walker's story, while not being a hero's one, was left incomplete. Therefore, I almost immediately switch my gaze onto what it is the game itself is doing, and how it's attempting to make me feel in regards to the ideas it's throwing up in my head. And more than anything else, it all kind of comes back to that one loading screen message I mentioned earlier. Spec Ops is a game that uniquely had me questioning so many of my actions despite having no say in them, whereas many other games have you performing some real disgusting actions and still being painted out as a hero. Spec Ops reminds you time and time again what it is you're actually doing. I'm not just talking about our murder of the civilians. Even when we take down the first soldiers of the 33rd, we're not let off the hook. We're reminded straight away that hey, you've just shot a fellow American. If you notice, Walker essentially takes on the role of your key action hero archetype. He tries his very best to go through the game, performing poor decision after poor decision, and still somehow look at himself as the hero in the situation. Only thing is, the other characters and the game itself don't perceive him as such, opening our eyes to the fact that a lot of the things we do are totally wrong. Our continued pursuit after Comrade isn't seen as endearing or heroic. By the end, it's seen as outright insane, and the realization that he's dead all along only kicks us in the teeth even more. Some people confuse those messages towards the end of the game to mean stop playing the game and you're a good good person. But that's not the point whatsoever. What this game's telling you to do more than anything else is to think about what you're actually consuming the next time you run into a story like this. The core plot of Spec Ops isn't particularly unique, and it clearly knows that. But in that similarity, it manages to create a startling contrast to other pieces of war media that surround it, and asks why some people are looked at as heroes when their actions appear morally unjustifiable. Why it is there's a winner and a loser, when so frequently in war there's only ever losers involved. Spec Ops fantastically makes the player question themselves and the shooter video game genre entirely, and it goes about it in a clever, unique and disturbing manner, leaving an impact that both myself and many others won't be forgetting anytime soon.
We heard shots. Is everything okay? Sergeant Roberts, what is going on?
Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai.